Support for Disrupted comes from the Connecticut Office of Film, Television, and Digital Media.
April 30th marked 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War. The war looms large in U.S. culture, and it's been the subject of countless books and movies. These works often focus on American soldiers and overlook the experiences of everyday Vietnamese people living through the war. Artist Thi Bui's 2017 best-selling graphic memoir, The Best We Could Do, began as an attempt to change that. It tells Bui's family story of living through the war and ultimately leaving her birth country to come to the United States. Family is central in this memoir. It opens with Thi giving birth to her son, a moment that changed the way she understood her parents and their experiences during war. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking with Thi Bui about writing about family and the Vietnamese diaspora. Thi is a cartoonist, writer, and artist. Most recently, she co-edited an issue of the literary journal McSweeney's. It was released to mark 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War. Thi, welcome to Disrupted.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited to talk to you about this journey that you have created of expression in so many different forms, and particularly in the context of the Vietnam War and the many ways that we either misrepresent or misunderstand its significance. But before we talk about your newest work, I want to talk about your memoir, The Best We Could Do. Share with our listeners what made you want to tell that story in that particular form.
So I am 50 years old, and I was born a few months before the end of the war. So I was actually the reason why my parents stayed behind and weren't part of the first wave of refugees that left in 75. I was part of a later wave of like so-called boat people. We left when I was 3 years old, in a very different way by boat, illegally. We were illegal immigrants, basically, or refugees who could have gotten thrown in jail if we were caught. But we resettled in the US, and there's always this rupture for any kind of refugee or immigrant. Like the story of life before often gets lost in the struggle just to survive in a new place where you've left everything behind and you're starting from scratch. My parents both had college degrees and were teachers in Vietnam. And when we came here, my dad couldn't get a job, even as a TA. And my mom ended up having to take a job for minimum wage on an assembly line in a factory, making circuit boards, which she had no, no previous experience with. So it's hard for so many people like me. It's the kids of refugees, the kids of survivors, to understand our heritage. And I think everybody has a curiosity about where they come from. And those of us people who grow up with it all around them, their family trees, people who look like them represented everywhere. Their cultural heritage, like celebrated by everybody around them. It's a lot easier to have a sense of home and who you are. But when you're completely displaced, you have to reconstruct it yourself. And so that's basically what The Best We Could Do is in its best iteration. I mean, I will admit that it started as a revenge project against all the bad Vietnam War movies that I grew up watching, looking for representations of myself and didn't find. So I was angry when I started it, and because it took me so long to figure out how to do this medium of comics, 10 plus years, I softened quite a bit. I became a mother in the process, and that taught me a lot too about how to interact with my parents. So it is ultimately, after that 10-year journey of figuring out how to do it, no longer an angry book, but rather like a book that seeks to forgive, to reconcile, to understand more deeply and better, and hopefully pass that on to other people.
I want to dig into the phrase that you used, the kids of survivors, Because you
Yeah.
said this project originally started as sort of revenge and out of anger of all the ways that people who came from Vietnam are treated as caricatures, all the stereotypes that become magnified in these ways. And writing this graphic memoir was a way of pushing back against that, but also saying, we define ourselves, we tell our stories because others do not understand the nuance and context of not only being the child of a survivor, but even what that means for the family in terms of maybe we don't want to talk about this too much because it's painful or because we don't want to continuously be branded as other or not a part of this community that we have moved into. How did writing this memoir then allow you and your family to move through some of that? So many people we've talked to have written memoirs say, look, I brought up things that the family didn't want to talk about, but I felt like we needed to, or I honored those things. What was that process like for you of writing?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's a big question. So I am really lucky to have two parents who are talkers. Not everybody has that. And I feel like a very lucky historian, a lucky oral historian, with access to all of this wealth of knowledge. And so I had to just learn how to ask the right questions, right? Um, and a lot of that involved actually getting out of the way of the process and asking my parents questions about themselves as human beings before they ever had me. And that meant getting over some of my issues with my parents, and looking to understand them, um, beyond, well, did you love me? Or what did you think about me? I had to take myself out of the equation a lot. And then I also, I was also inspired by a couple of really amazing graphic memoirs like Mouse by Art Spiegelman, and Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. And both of them did such an amazing job of putting like a family story in the front and like a country story in the background. And I really wanted to do that too. Mouse in particular really deals well with the intergenerational conflict that comes with being a child of a survivor. The only thing is like so much of that conflict gets played out in like really heated dialogue, right? For Art Spiegelman. And like my people like don't talk that much. They speak in silent pauses, very pregnant silent pauses. So I had to figure out how to represent that in the medium of comics. And I also had to get over my fear of like what my parents would say about certain things that I brought up. And I learned that the best way to do it was actually to show them rough drafts of each chapter as I was going, so that if they really needed to, they could exercise some veto power and I would honor their wishes. But I think maybe giving them that power let them trust me more. So if I had like just done the whole thing and hid it from them and then published it for everybody to see, and then it was the first time they were seeing it, we might have had some problems. But because we ironed them out amongst ourselves, and um, I honored their wishes. They actually rewarded me by remembering more stuff based on my sketches. And like I was helping jog their memories. So all of my edits actually were adding rather than subtracting. So I ended up with a much richer manuscript because I turned them into collaborators.
That theme of respect, of family, and in particular motherhood, runs centrally throughout the book. And I want to pull out a quote from the book. And you write, family is now something I have created and not just something I was born into. Talk to us about the significance of that line.
Yes, the reason why the book begins with my labor is because that was the moment that I finally understood what it means to be a parent, the incredible weight of it, and the realization that there's no way you don't get it wrong. It is the hardest job on earth to raise another human, and you just have to face so many of your own insecurities and just do the best you can, right? So that is the built-in disclaimer. And then the thing is, I am also writing as a child. And so I also understand like the impact of some of the imperfection, and that it's not just something that you can understand so easily or even forgive so easily. It's complicated. Sometimes the best someone could do wasn't good enough for you, and then you got to spend 10 years in therapy working it out, or making other big changes in your life so that you can live and try to be happy. But these complex human relationships are what we have.
They're what we have. They are what we all navigate. And one of the things I really appreciated about your book and your approach is that it also affirms those intergenerational connections, the realization that, yes, parents do the best that they can do with what they have before them, but they also had lives before us.
Mhm.
And some of the choices they made or the choices that were made for them then, of course, shape how they are in our lives and the ways that I think for parents, particularly for mothers, we think about these are the things I never want to repeat or replicate and pass on. And then there are these wonderful things that I want to cherish and hold on to. How then do you tell this scope of a story, understanding that for many people, there's a judgment that comes along with that as we are thinking about the choices of our parents, how it shapes us, and how we mother. How do you think about that in the context of judgment?
Oh, judgment. Yeah, I've never been judged as a mother.
Never.
You
I
get
know it's
judged,
a foreign
yeah,
concept.
right, right. I mean, you get judged by like how you hold your baby, like what time of day you bring your baby out into the world, like the temperature, like what your baby's wearing. It's like whether you breastfeed or bottle feed, so many opinions out there, often by people who are not mothers or just, don't see the full picture of what you're doing and what's happening even in the 23 other hours of that day. Um, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of pressure on um, mothers in particular to be perfect somehow. I feel like that is the double standard. I think men, I mean, it's getting better, I think. I do know some good fathers out there, and I always get a little weepy when I see them. Um, but I feel like they do get a lot of credit just for showing up consistently, whereas mothers will get torn down for every little thing that we do wrong. So the standard seems to be perfection. And so you're always going to get something wrong.
I'm curious what writing this memoir that is so much about your parents and that, again, that intergenerational context. But I'm curious what writing this memoir taught you about yourself. Was there something that surprised you or stood out on this journey of learning?
Um, yeah, I'll be open in saying that it was very therapeutic to work on this memoir. It's not the memoir of a famous, accomplished person who sits down at the end of their life to recount, everything that they did. It's more a vehicle. It was a vehicle for me to ask big questions about my origins. Um, and what are these parent-child relationships that are so fraught and painful? And what can we do with them to transmute the pain? Um, it was interesting to do the memoir as a book with drawings. The medium of comics was kind of new to me, and I had to get over like my dislike of repeating myself because you actually do have to draw yourself over and over again to create a sequence of images. But what was funny is that if I had written it only in words, there would just be my disembodied voice recounting these memories. But drawing these scenes from my childhood, for example, I had to reconstruct them and draw myself as a little kid. So now I'm an adult looking at myself as a little kid having these experiences. And I think that was the therapeutic part. I felt bad for this little kid. And then I also felt a tenderness for her too. She's like so little and so cute. And this was a lot for her to be going through. And no wonder she's a bit scarred. But like I think sometimes in your memories when you're dealing with trauma, the trauma feels so present that you forget that you were quite little. Do you know what I mean?
Completely. And I hear it as you're talking about that process, the way that you were able to be gentle or more gentle
Yeah.
with yourself and to extend some grace to yourself, to again say, you are a little kid dealing with major challenges that many adults have a difficult time figuring out a way. And so that kind of reflection and tenderness to say, you know what, kid? You did all
Mhm.
right. You did the best you could. There's a beauty in that also about thinking about how we move forward through difficult
Right.
times.
Yeah.
Coming up, more with best-selling author Thi Bui. She'll talk about a poem inspired by her relationship with her son.
But I just wanted him to know that there was, even though this mother comes with a lot of baggage, a lot of refugee baggage, a lot of pain in my lineage, that it wasn't something to fear, and that if anything, it made my love for him that much more strong.
This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking with Thi Bui, best-selling author of the graphic memoir, The Best We Could Do. To mark 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War, Thi co-edited an issue of the literary journal McSweeney's. It features work from artists from across the Vietnamese diaspora. The issue is gorgeously packaged in a cigar box that features Thi's art. The issue originated with a literary residency in France, so I asked Thi to share more about that residency.
Oh, yeah, it was September of 2023 that 10 writers of the Vietnamese diaspora came together. They were invited by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, or DVAN. Um, and the writers came from the US, France, and one came from Israel. Some knew each other, some didn't. And they were meeting in this like very eclectic, artistic, bohemian mansion on a river in the countryside that could have been haunted, maybe was haunted. Um, and they were to spend 2 weeks working on their own work, also potentially collaborating and having conversations about what it means to be Vietnamese in the diaspora. And it was just like a really magical experience of people finding each other, like long lost brothers and sisters almost finding each other, and having the most amazing time, like swimming in the river during the day, writing, meeting for walks, and then in the evening, all meeting in the garden for dinner and conversation. Um, and what came out of it was a lot of joy, actually, in finding missing pieces of yourself and in having other people to corroborate with about the weirdness of certain customs or phrases or parental behavior. We spent a lot of time like joking about our mothers, and joking about ourselves. There's a lot of poking fun of ourselves. And so I think the spirit of all of that ended up in our writing that we collected.
This collection of writing is powerful, and it pushes back against, again, the mischaracterizations often attached to the Vietnam War, to Vietnam as a country, to people from Vietnam. And I think about this current era in the United States, where there's often a resistance to understanding history in its fullness, in its complexity, in its ugliness, but also centering people within the telling of those histories. And that's what makes this collection, I think, particularly powerful, but also so relevant and resonant for people, to bring people together across experiences, across backgrounds and connections to identity, and to tell these stories and these pieces in their own words. What was the impact for you of being able to be a part of this collection and to, again, the memoir started from this place of rage and resistance to now saying, I am co-creating this collection because I want us to be able to contribute that. What did that feel like for you?
Oh, it feels wonderful to be able to hold space at this point in my life. The just being able to complete the best we could do was the life goal. And then the incredible reception that it's gotten has just been like way beyond my wildest dreams. And in some ways, I'm like, I didn't have a life plan for after that because I was like, okay, life goal complete. What do I do now? Maybe I'll just try to be useful. So I'm like overjoyed when I can be useful and it's fun. Um, so yeah, uplifting other writers and artists is incredibly fun. And to work with a publisher like Mrs. McSweeney's, who is like, I would say, an incredible enabler of wacky and wild ideas. They never say no. They're always like, yes, and
Mm.
do you want to add some more? Do you want to make it crazier? Do you want to add some like gold foil all around it? You know? So it as an artist, it was very exciting to be able to like drum up this idea that we would have a treasure box for our writing and that it would be beautiful and evoke our rich cultural heritage and also be eclectic because that's also the aesthetic of art growing up. It's like high low. There was a high low mix for sure that we wanted to capture. And I wanted there to be room for the sadness and reflection, and also to encourage us to express our loudness, our jokes, our silliness that was apparent all the time when we were around each other, but maybe we don't always show that side to the public.
And then again, thinking about holding space for joy and affirming the ability to do that and the ways that it comes out in the writing and the collection, but also, as you mentioned, the experience. In addition to being a co-editor, you also wrote multiple pieces for that issue. One of those pieces is a poem called Mother's Day 2024. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to read that for us.
Sure, be happy to. Just a little bit nervous.
You're the expert here.
Right. Mother's Day 2024. La mer and mer that rhymes with yeah, and nook that is water, and dut that is land, and dut nook that is country. For half a century held meanings handed to me by others that I passed on to others. I think I have lived long enough to have my own understandings of words. Like this sea that lifts me can also kill me, so these words carry both pain and great love. May I grow wiser. May you and I bear not too much of one and be born by the other. May you feel the depth of my love, not as something to fear, but as a body of water holding you up to the sky.
There's absolutely no reason for you to ever be nervous when you write like that.
Thank you.
I want to sit for a moment with the words of that poem because it is offering a wish and a hope for others. But I also hear, T, in some ways, a wish and a hope for yourself as the writer and as a person and as a mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that often we culturally, socially don't provide that space where the idea is you are supposed to pour everything into everyone else and then you just harness whatever scraps are
Mm-hmm.
left. Share with me what that poem means for you.
I read it to my son when I read it out loud. It was written to him, but it was also written for me to try to express some of the conflict that I had in me as I was moving far away from my son, as he had already moved to college. I waited till he grew up and went to college to move away from California and start a new chapter in New Orleans. And I had a lot of ambivalence about whether I'd made the right decision. Um, and it was just another instance, I guess, of me having to leave him to go do my work. I've done that before, and I always felt awful about it. And I was single parenting for his last 2 years of high school also, and I had a lot of nervousness that I wasn't a good enough mother. Um, and he was a teenage boy who couldn't express to me everything that was going on with him. So there was just this constant nagging feeling that we weren't as close as I wanted us to be, and he didn't understand everything about me. But I just wanted him to know that there was, even though this mother comes with a lot of baggage, a lot of refugee baggage, a lot of pain in my lineage, that it wasn't something to fear, and that if anything, it made my love for him that much more strong.
It sounds like it makes the love stronger, but also your ability to express that love to him. You know, we've had other guests on the show who have talked about coming from a lineage of trauma or a lineage of pain, and how there are often these walls of self-protection and preservation that makes it difficult to express that love to others, or to even express the frustration and confusion because you're constantly feeling like you're in survival mode.
Hmm.
And again, allowing that vulnerability as a reader and as a listener makes it even more powerful, because we see ourselves in your words and we understand that challenge, but we also appreciate how it plays out differently for people based on their own experiences and background. You also write a short story in this collection called The Last Fig, and it is both a surreal and somewhat morbid reimagining of your writing residency. You cover all the emotions in this collection in really beautiful ways as well. Talk to us more about writing The Last Fig.
It was a personal challenge to me after spending 2 weeks with what I consider to be real writers. And I'm like, I don't feel like a real writer when I hang out with writers because, like, I'm just not that as neurotic about words as they are. You know, I draw pictures too. Um, so I just wanted to give myself a challenge to do something that was completely in words and no pictures. And on a basic level, it just meant that I had to add in so much descriptive language. I was like, man, this takes forever. Um, but also, um, it gave me a chance to try out a genre that I hadn't written in. The idea was I would write a version of our writer's residency as a Vietnamese fairy tale, but Vietnamese fairy tales have a strong horror element in them. Like they're pretty grim, like and grisly, like a lot of like Hans Christian Andersen Grimm's fairy tales before they get Disneyfied. Um, and so it is dark and morbid, as you say, and hopefully funny sometimes in how over the top it gets. And I love fiction for allowing you to like just let your mind go places that you wouldn't go in real life, and see what happens. It's also my love letter to the other writers. Like, you know, it's just so fun to get to roast your friends and, you know, the ones that uh, warning, there's a little tiny little spoiler in here. The ones that I kill off are, you know, the ones that are closest to me that I felt like I could do that too.
Coming up, more with Thi Bui. She'll share the message that she wants to offer to young people.
I'm not one of those old people who say you need to save us. I am very much invested in working with young people, as I am not dead yet, and I'm going to keep working until the day I die, on imagining a better world than this.
This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown Dean. This hour, we're talking with best-selling author Thi Bui about how her writing helps broaden the way that Americans understand the Vietnamese diaspora. To mark 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War, Thi co-edited an issue of the literary journal McSweeney's. Before the break, we were talking about a story that Thi wrote in the issue called The Last Fig. There were many lines that struck me in that story, but I wanted to focus on one in particular. Thi writes, "In some places, repeat violence stirs up people into a bloody uprising. With Vietnamese of the diaspora, perhaps, the emotional intensity of their response goes as much inward as out. Their hurt is palpable, rage tamped down by rain." Ask Thi to tell me more about that line.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But you picked out the sentence that I worried does not belong in there because it's like its own its own separate poem or essay. Yeah, this comes from a lifetime of observing Vietnamese people and the way that they don't talk about a lot of what is going on. But if you're somebody who asks a lot of questions and spends a lot of time listening to people, you hear the rage, you hear the pain, you see it in people's actions. Um, but they are also a people who have lived through so many traumas. It's not just the Vietnam War, that was 20 years, but before that, there was like the Indo-China War and 100 years of occupation. Like there's the occupation by the Japanese, you got 100 years of colonialism by the French, and 1,000 years of fighting domination by the Chinese. So there is just a history of enduring and resisting and enduring and adapting. Um, and I associate that with, I don't know, the rains. Rain is like a very like constant physical presence in Vietnam. And it is both life-threatening sometimes, but mostly life-giving in a country that, is so agricultural and lives around its rivers and deltas. So I think I am proud of Vietnamese people for being so resilient and adaptive, and I look to them now. I didn't always as a kid because I didn't have the right understanding, but now I see so many examples of resilience to look toward as models for how to be.
When you think about those models of how to be, I think about my own experience as an African American woman from the South who is
Mhm.
often in spaces to tell stories of that resilience. And some people say to me, well, how do you carry that weight of being one of few or being looked to for perspective?
Mhm.
And I don't see it so much as a weight anymore, but as an honor of thinking
Mhm.
about all that the ancestors and the elders have endured. How do I honor that story of resilience while also pointing out, yes, they are people of resilience who shouldn't have had to be so resilient given all that they faced. I wonder about that for you because you are telling these complex stories of people who not only were overlooked in their past, but are even today so overlooked and misunderstood. Do you see that as a weight or a challenge, or do you see it as an honor of you can be part of a diasporic experience and a diasporic collection of people who are telling those stories?
I am so excited to be talking to you. I feel like we could talk for another hour about this. Um, I feel all of those things. It depends on what I am seeing getting reflected in other Vietnamese people. Sometimes, I will be honest, I feel incredible anxiety about certain folks who are, I don't know, have succumbed to this notion that somehow we were special refugees and that nobody else is like us. I'm like, no, we were exactly like every other wave of refugees that has come to these shores. And if anything, we should be welcoming people as we were welcomed by African American civil rights activists in the 70s. We owe a huge debt to that movement and people who put their names on and hearts out on the line to welcome refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia at a time when they had just like finished fighting so hard for their own civil rights. So yeah, I get sad when that abundance isn't present in people's mindsets, but I also understand that maybe some people don't feel secure here yet to share. I do feel an honor in being who I am. As in the words of the great Sandra Oh, it is an honor just to be Asian American. And I think when you feel your light, other people can't help but look to you as a beacon because times are dark, and everybody needs some small heroes if they can't find big heroes. And that's all right. We can be each other's heroes. We can lift each other up. Um, the striving towards being the best version of ourselves, I guess, is something that I want to stick to and hold other people to. Staving off of cynicism for as long as you can in your life seems important too. And to pass that realistic optimism on to the next generation seems incredibly necessary if we are to survive. And we can learn those lessons not just from our own folks, but from others around us. And I feel it all the time living in the South now.
You have me thinking about James Baldwin, who said, I can't afford to be cynical. I have a duty to my nieces and to my nephews to affirm their hope and affirm their possibility. And you talked about being a beacon. I see you as someone who is a beacon, but also a bridge builder and helping us to understand history and context, how we make sense of the moments that we are in, but also how we chart a path through those moments. You are currently working on a project about immigrant detention and deportation. I can't imagine there's anything happening right now that would, make that relevant. But go with me on this. Book about immigrant detention and deportation. Share with our listeners a little bit about that book and why you felt compelled or called to write that book.
I started it actually during the first Trump administration, and I was called to the work rather than thinking about it on my own. I was coming back from my first round of research in Vietnam about climate change in the Mekong Delta. That was to be the topic of my next book. And I came back a little discouraged, feeling like I had a faulty framework and I had to rethink it. And then I kept getting these tweets from this lawyer trying to help, like asking me to help like rally attention around a case, a lawsuit by Cambodian Americans who were being detained by the Trump administration to be deported to Cambodia. I was like, I don't know anything about how to stop deportation, but I can read really fast. So the more I read, the madder I got. And I started to do like little portraits and little tiny stories of like one person. And then I found out like the Vietnamese were also getting rounded up and were terribly scared. And so I did a little portrait and drawing of another man who's Vietnamese and getting separated from his 5-month-old baby. And then being the history nerd and law nerd that I am, I also did some research on like, well, how did these people end up in this predicament where they like already served long prison sentences that were way longer than they should have been, and then after they finished those, got handed over to ICE to be deported to countries that they left as refugees when they were tiny. How did we get there legally, structurally? And so I did a story for the Nib around that. That was drawings and words. And then after that, I was like, well, I just got to go bigger. So I convinced my publisher, One World, to let me change my book topic from climate change in Vietnam to Asian Americans and the deportation machine. And then it became, at this point, 2019, 2020, and a lot of things were going on. And the George Floyd protests really uh, woke a lot of people up, but it made me like think about the book differently. I was like, I definitely need to talk about our uh, I need to talk about mass incarceration too, as part of this huge problem. And then 2021 came along, and then there were these very painful series of attacks on Asian elders, and that stirred up all kinds of feelings in communities. And it also like drummed up a lot of support among Asians for like more policing. And so then my heart was breaking for elders who looked like my parents being attacked. And then my heart was breaking for our people making a mistake in putting our resources into a system that's already so violent, that already hurts so many people, including our people. But people don't know about that. So it was just a lot. And like, personally, it was hard to be going through the pandemic and uh, an acute family crisis and single parenting. So this book kind of almost killed me. But I have recouped, and now I am in a place where I am personally more together to be able to handle all of these different balls that I'm juggling in trying to write this book to make it clear for people. I feel like my job is almost like a high school teacher. I'm like ingesting all of this and then trying to make it like understandable so that people can see the big picture and have like better tools for making like decisions about where we need to go today. Unfortunately, history has come back around, and now we're in the second administration that has like exponentially gotten worse about the topic. And so I feel a certain urgency to write and draw faster than I can
Mm.
to make this useful.
You described yourself as a history nerd, a law nerd. You're also a former teacher. We like
Mhm.
nerds on this show. We proudly declare our nerd status. I'm curious, T, what you say to young people who, I'm the mother of a teenager, and I often think these young people must be overwhelmed
Mhm.
by the utter chaos, dysfunction, uncertainty that they are witnessing, and yet also wanting them to have some historical context of we
Mhm.
didn't get here overnight,
Mhm.
but there's a possibility in the coming together and the doing and the understanding to not just survive, but to really feel like we have accomplished something together.
Mhm.
What do you say to young people as you working on these projects and telling these stories? What would be your message to young people?
You're not alone. I'm not one of those old people who say, you need to save us. I am very much invested in working with young people because I am not dead yet. And I'm going to keep working until the day I die on imagining a better world than this. Um, um, to believe that I believe in them also. I believe in me, but I also believe in them to do the imagining too, and to do it differently than I might, and to step into their power, which they have a lot of. It just might not be apparent sometimes. But if we believe that we have it, there's a certain magic that comes with that. If we don't believe that we have it, then we'll never have it. But as an artist, I got to say, sometimes you can make things happen just by believing.
There's a power and a defiance in believing.
Mhm.
And I think that if the people did not have that power, we wouldn't see the kind of efforts that we're seeing to undermine that power.
Clearly.
And as you say, if we can see it and believe it in ourselves and others, what a change that can make. My last question to you may seem simplistic, but given your statement, I think is important. And that question is, what is giving you hope in this moment?
I think that the world has ended 1,000 times over already in different parts of the world, and still we're here. I'm here. the country I was born in doesn't exist anymore. I'm here and I'm thriving. So I believe that things can rise out of the ashes, and we have it. I think it's just built into our DNA to survive, and we can do a little bit better than that in making sure that other people also survive, and that it's not just a world of the strongest survive, but if we extend ourselves to each other, then we save more of our humanity, but also we are stronger and kinder that way. And I think strong and kind is necessary to face the future.
Strong and kind. We are grateful for the many ways that you use your art to remind us of that and to tell these stories that need to be known. Thi Bui is a cartoonist, writer, and artist. Her best-selling graphic memoir is called The Best We Could Do. Most recently, she co-edited an issue for the literary journal McSweeney's. It was released on the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. Thi, thank you so much for joining us.
It was such an honor. Thank you.
Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon Aiken, and Meg Fitzgerald. The Disrupted team recently said goodbye to one of our long-term team members. Meg Dalton was the director of audio storytelling and talk shows. But more than a director, Meg was the colleague that you could always depend on to give sage advice, to give encouragement, and to never sacrifice the integrity of what we do here in public media. I am personally grateful for all that Meg brought to the show and to the team. And we collectively are excited to see the next steps in her journey. Thank you, Meg, for all that you brought to the team, and know that you will always be part of Team Disrupted. You can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcast. Just search for Disrupted and Connecticut Public. And if you love an episode, please remember to leave us a comment. You can listen to new episodes every Friday at 9 a.m. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Thanks for listening.